Hello and welcome back to the final part of the Cold War Continuum, which we've entitled Convergences and Futurities, thinking about on the eve of a Second World War, or the possibility as to whether we are on the eve of a Second Cold War, new protagonists, old scores, and fugitive possibilities for escaping the sonic impasse. Maybe we should reintroduce everyone. Going around on my left.
Oh, introducing myself?
Yes.
I'm Nik Nowak and initiator of the event, Sounding Systems, and we are sitting in my exhibition, Schizo Sonics, and I'm just really amazed how quickly that day went by, because it was so dense and interesting that I didn't really recognize 8 hours passing by. Thank you all for joining from my side as well. That's me, and to my left.
Hang on, wait a minute, there's Sebastian.
Yeah, I forgot the
we
people
have virtual people
on the screen. I hand over to you, Sebastian.
Okay, so I don't know. I'm introducing myself again. Is that correct?
I think we make a quick introduction round, because maybe people are joining in.
Okay, so I'm Sébastien Carriol, and I was mainly here because I curated an exhibition called Jamaica in Paris and Sao Paulo and now Kingston. And also I directed a documentary series called Sound System for Arte in France and Germany.
Thank you, Sebastian. Steve?
Hi, I'm Steve Goodman, also known as Code 9, and I'm really glad I'm at home in a nice warm room.
Okay, that's your offering. Thank you, Steve.
You guys are really living the Cold War right now, aren't you?
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Sarah Farina. I'm a DJ, producer, and activist, and I'm the co-founder of Transmission with my friend Dr. Cassie Meissner. And yeah, this project aims to make the political relevance of rave history and club culture more audible and visible.
Okay.
Oh, I've been introduced now. Kerstin Meissner. I'm an education researcher working on belonging and power relations within educational contexts, institutions, frameworks, I guess, and co-run Transmission with Sarah.
Hi, my name is Bodo Mrotzek. I'm a historian. I worked about popular music conflicts, sound conflicts from a transnational perspective, and I'm currently with the Berlin Center for Cold War Studies working on sensory history, on sound, but also on other senses like olfaction, for example.
Hello, my name is Martin Kowalski. I'm an author and a social philosopher. I also work in Berlin club cultures and other collectives. I would like to take the opportunity to say thank you to Nik and to Jessica for the organization. And the wonderful day was really very interesting. It went by in a blink.
In an Augenblink. That's the German I know.
So I am looking forward to this final round of very interesting guests and talks and inputs.
Wonderful. Well, I have said, if you want to co-chair as well, so I
will do my best.
But what I thought, without it actually being heavily structured, is thinking about if we can start to find convergences. I mean, if maybe I start, I think everyone is talking about the significance of bass, the significance of sound and sounding systems or unsounding systems. And at that point, when your talk was on the AI, I couldn't get the AI to work quickly enough. So yes, I missed it, but it's very much a talk that I wanted to be wanted to kind of listen in on. But yes, the connections that I saw today, particularly about thinking about how sound shapes space, how we use it to territorialize space, even when it's an immaterial space, the skies, these inversions of modes of listening, the threat in modes of listening, perceiving, the use in which sound is made to create spaces, to create new identities, the way in which sound is used to reconstruct history. There's so many points of convergences that I just wanted to end by having a discussion where we could reflect upon each other's works, what parts we may have found useful from other people's work for how we think about our own works. I mean, unfortunately, Louis Trudy Soki can't be here. He had another appointment. Sorry, around his book tour. But yes, for me, there were other ways of thinking about, and with Sebastian, the kind of Jamaican history, and the history as I've always read it, of this explicit schism, but actually there being much more of a nuance, and actually thinking about that these sound system operators may have been even more powerful than the politicians as a possibility. So, you know, that was a bit of a revelation to me. But also from Lewis's work, and again, I think he was sorry to not be able to have this conversation with you, these words of listening in and these covert listening methods. And for him, he was arguing that as a man of color, as you know, from a situated knowledge, going into spaces where one would not have been permitted to go in another period of history, and trying to listen in on that history and the materiality of the architecture of that space. So I thought that might have been an amazing conversation to have, but maybe another time for the future. But yeah, so there have been many sort of provocative points that have really activated how I've can conceive of sound, actually, and this Cold War continuum, which is much more diasporized, and which has a much longer reach than than one had possibly thought. So yeah, I think that's largely what I've got. But I want us to be able to ask questions between one another, and yeah, so you can take up that point in no particular order. But yes.
Jessica, I actually have a question for you. Because you know the London dance floor so well, but you also know the one in Berlin, or have been on many different dance floors in Berlin. What is the first thing, or one of the first things you noticed, like when we talk about the differences there and how you felt in that space? Yeah.
Surveillance, yeah. And I'm sure maybe Steve would agree with that. The difference of going to a club, actually, maybe I think about it the other way around, coming to a club in Berlin for the first time, I can't even remember how many years ago, and not having to sign something or show your passport, or not, be turned away because you don't have your passport or some form of identification. I mean, I've been to clubs one evening with Steve where, they were fingerprinting you. So
really?
Yeah.
Why?
And it wasn't London, it was Croydon. It was just outside London, home of dubstep. And but yeah, the surveillance, the constant shine in the light, what are you doing? The surveillance, the surveillance. But also different modes of moving. We talked sort of about sound and the body today. And, I don't know whether that's more attuned to a kind of different cultural rhythmicity, possibly to whether London is a more culturally diverse, ethnically diverse city, so people, I think, move differently. But yeah, I'll come back to surveillance. Surveillance, yeah.
Steve, do you think the same?
Yeah.
You've been to so many different dance floors.
Around the world, yeah.
I mean, going to a club in London is like going through the airport. The security system where you have to, I'm exaggerating, you don't have to take your shoes off, but you know, a lot of clubs, in order to be allowed to stay open, they had to have like metal detectors at the door and so on. And so that's, you know, a negative side about clubbing in London. A negative side, as Jess has just said about clubbing in Berlin, is it tends to be much more monocultural. What else? I think there's a different, in my experience of, like, for example, playing in Berlin as opposed to London, is the to use the phrase Jess has used a few times recently of affect engineering. The affective dynamics of the club tends to be very different, of the night tends to be very different, because this might be a techno thing, I don't know, but it seems to me not just a techno thing. That for example, when I play in Berlin, the sound engineer is always like, well, keep the volume quiet because people are going to be here for a long time, and you don't want to have peaks. You know, you want a long flat plateau that will last for potentially days, because that.
And they do stay days.
Whereas the affective dynamic of clubs in London, not all clubs, maybe this is slightly different types of music, but tends to be more peaks and troughs, or more explosive. I mean, there's an interesting parallel to be made to do with like libidinal dynamics and kind of the continuous orgasm versus the orgasm and then deflation and then orgasm deflation. And British, I'd say, like, bass music tends to be like explosion deflation, whereas techno clubs, or just clubs in Berlin, generally tend to have this flat plateau that seems to last for a much longer time. So there's pros and cons to different club cultures I've played in, different affective dynamics, different ethnic makeups, different ways of moving. What was the question?
Spaces, clubs, DJs, London, Berlin.
Yeah.
Experience.
This is coming to an interesting crisis point recently, because, you know, in the last couple of weeks there's been a lot of kind of Women's Day protests and protests against misogyny and violence against women, and this pathetic attempt by the government in the UK to kind of appease some of these demands is, we're going to send undercover cops into the clubs to make women feel safer, which is a completely ludicrous idea. At the same time, what's also just being proposed through Parliament in the UK is severe legal restrictions on protests, particularly noise levels of protests. This is all coming through in a similar cluster of legislation. So you've simultaneously got this policing of public noise, the public protest noise levels, public congregation, and under the guise of protecting women, a policing of
all bodies,
of congregation within club spaces as well. So it's always important for me. It's always important to remember that the more, let's call them, male fantasies of sonic warfare, which is like bizarre sonic weapons from science fiction, dreamt up completely against the laws of physics, is not really, it's really not what's interesting about sonic warfare at all. It's the way in which kind of everyday social activity is, and sounding or noise making is policed, and yeah, that kind of political aesthetics of politics and politics of aesthetics.
I was going to maybe, sorry if I can just interject, think about perhaps on sound in this way, and particularly wanting to think about the possibility though I already think we're in it, but that's me, of a new Cold War. And this already being premised around sound. So in the UK, for example, the Huawei contract being dropped by the British government just as it was about to be run through because of this fear of the return of this, the possibility that that China, as the return threat, could be collecting all this data and weaponizing it against against UK citizens. And it put me in mind of Steve's paper this morning about just this idea. We've almost like a colonial communist rebranding of the Chinese. So it's the yellow peril, then the communist threat, all sort of embroiled in one to amplify. We're having this amplification again of the possibility of this threat, and it's contagious. So again, in the last 2 weeks of Boris Johnson ordering a renewal of the UK's nuclear capability. So it just seems that we are on this threshold. Trump happily has gone, but it seems the prime movers seem to be the same. There's all these moments, to talk about club dynamics in terms of peaks and troughs. It seems like there are moments that were hugely amplified by Trump, Kim Jong-un, and, new alliances maybe with Turkey. And then you get this trough. Maybe it's kind of plateaued in the States because of Biden. And now Boris Johnson seems to be filling that space. And again, these sort of sonic politics, again, the ousting, the distrust of China in this sense, it's just one that made me kind of connect the two, or the three, but he's four. But Helmut is not here at this moment. Yeah, that some of these themes that were being picked up around kind of increased securitization over the possibility of threat and the technologies through which we monitor threat.
If I can pick up on that.
Sorry, that was very long-winded.
Yeah, but I think that's an interesting point, because whilst in the Cold War, sound was a very important medium to reach people on the other side of the wall, or to, it was also kind of very simply two-sided, like two systems, whilst now through the complexity of the global digitalization, the outlets or the propaganda outlets are so multiplied and so complex and so contradictional in so many senses. And then again, the collecting of data is used to provide informations to kind of have kind of a control and navigation of the people, basically. And I always find it good to think the simplicity of kind of acoustic strategies to understand the same mechanisms today in a more complex, digitalized, invisible and unaudible, audible complex. I also wanted to actually, I was thinking about that as well when Steve was giving his presentation. Okay. in terms of conspiracy theories and sonic weaponry, because that's always when it comes to this the possibilities that sound actually has to manipulate or mysterious sonic weapons. It's often that you find yourself in the weirdest conspiracy theory fields, where if you know a little bit about sound, you already know this is kind of impossible in terms of physics. But there is also kind of a mystification of the possibilities of sound. But we have actually those possibilities with the use of
disconnected.
With the use of digital methods, like using metadata and to provide information in certain social networks and so on. Sorry, Jessica, what did you say?
No, sorry, I was just talking to Lisa. We have questions coming through, but the iPad is connecting. Maybe they hear us talking about... Sorry.
Yeah, Steve, I actually wanted to ask you in terms of this field of conspiracy theory and sonic warfare. Is that an experience you also have with your work, that you kind of, especially with the Cuba project, that even from professional, there are the wildest theories that you had to react to, or did you even? I have some memory that you even were spreading some news as well about Cuba and what might have been done there in the context of the Odin project.
Yeah, I mean, it does get boring that, sometimes all people want to ask about or speak about is these kind of urban myths. The classic one is the brown note. So people hear, you wrote a book on sonic warfare. Can you make someone go to the toilet? Using what's the frequency? It does get a bit tedious. But this whole area of conspiracy theory, urban myth, male fantasy, and so on, it does, and post-truth, it does open up a set of questions about, how do you respond to that as an artist or as a theorist or whatever? And so with the Audent project, the question often was, well, it seems like the whole spin cycle has come off the axle of truth altogether. And so what's the artistic response to that? Is it to try and correct lies, correct falsities, or to push the nonsense to a breaking point? And I think with Audent is on the edge of, between theory and fiction. Is a kind of sonic fiction, or what Sun Ra would call myth science. And I think this kind of hybrid approach is certainly one interesting strategy that I've been interested in experimenting with, of like, I don't know how to put it. I suppose throwing pushing the lies further is one way of seeing it. Because, and so sometimes my responses to the Havana syndrome have gone down that route of basically the whole situation is so bizarre and fictional to start with that to try and correct it with to try and correct the discourse with, when science is already completely confused and at a dead end with it, like, what do you do? Where do you go? Do you just participate in this game of coming up with more and more rationales for something which is just a void of knowledge? Or do you do something which pushes that system to a crisis point? Yeah, I mean, there's just some reflections I've had kind of working in this field, which is so, pardon my French, saturated with bullshit.
Yeah, and then also what I find interesting, that a lot of these things that get accelerated in terms of what would be possible, kind of even a wish for extremes, but a lot is possible with sound on a very immediate, and even though so what I want to head to is actually sound can or has an immediate effect on the brain in terms of creating emotions, and that is what is always used in terms of politics, sonic warfare, psychological warfare, and music, and why we love music so much. And this is also what I think in your talk was mentioned in terms of not only listening to the other, but also using the knowledge of the other, and then to create also an enemy other, and working this out by emotions, by connecting. And I think now I get it together. I think I heard in Lewis's talk that he talked about this idea of that was created of Afro-American music in the context of the idea of the Americans to create the idea of freedom in the context of Americanism, which was a huge campaign of the CIA as well. Like kind of in America itself, there was suppression and racism, but then again, the music has been used to create an idea in the interest of the CIA, and I think there were quite interesting overlappings between the two talks.
Yeah, I can tie in with this perhaps. I think generally we have a very positive understanding of sound in relation to emotion with music. It can move people, it creates communities. But if you think about, creating a community is including people, but it also means to exclude people. To say it with the title of the jazz musician Dobie Gray, if you create an in-crowd, you also create an out-crowd. And these are is perhaps the lowest level of conflict, is such fissures in society. And if you even think about the very fact that the military maintained radio stations sending music throughout the entire Cold War in Europe, especially in Germany, all the allies had their own musical stations. Why did they do it? To entertain people. Usually the military has strategic goals. And that, I guess, is... For me, this day made perfectly clear that sound is not only a positive thing, it is just, first of all, just a thing. And the images, positive, negative, whatever, are brought in by people. And I think Steve Goodman's book on sonic warfare made this perfectly clear to everybody. And because even not only in popular music scholarship, but also among sound studies scholars, there is this term of the audio-visual litany. I think Jonathan Stern brought this in, that even scholars of sound who are actually not interested in music in the first place, but also in noise, have this notion of, defending sound in a visual-dominated world, for example. And I think
my phone, because the iPad isn't working, it's not connected.
To have the focus on the ability of sound also to have a divisive function in societies in general. That's what this day was all about.
Maybe just adding one thought on using sound as a thing. That's a big discussion within sound studies, if it's a thing or if it's an event. And maybe just adding up on why we need to use sound within educational spaces, exactly because of that. Because within music studies, it's usually not recognized that sound is, that sound doesn't just include or entertain people or create scenes or connectivity, but also is what you are covering in your work. A weapon, or could be used as one, and just emphasizing on the lack of sound within educational study, and the German word Bildung already says it, because Bild is the image, and we don't really, like, the way education works is always within the kind of visual and the visual binaries, and sound is just really underrepresented, so there is a lack of education on that as well.
Yeah, also learning to listen. I think that was also a topic today, how we actually recognize when we actually start to listen, and recognize how we were sometimes very simple in the approach of audio spaces. I mean, for me, it's now that, like, for example, when in my work, when I do research a lot archive-based, that I only by going deeper and finding more and more material, I recognize how pre-selected the material was that I thought I found before. That has to do with cultural politics, with in Germany, for example, as well with the ideological winner. So the archives are even kind of what is used more is kind of more on the surface of what you find. It's also how Google works, basically. The more search.
How Wikipedia works.
Everything. So you get this surface which gives you an idea of a reality, but under this surface are so many more layers, and actually that's how I don't know who said it today, but it was, I think earlier as well, I talked about dub music, where I was thinking the remixing, the always scratching open, and then also working with not only the content but also the knowledge of what frequencies can do and what rhythmicity can do and where it comes from, what kind of codes are embedded in it. That's when listening starts. And
can I just add something?
Yeah, I'm just going to ask Elisa if she could put the iPad. We've got questions coming in, and I'd really love the audience to be involved. But the iPad.
Maybe Elisa can tell you the questions.
Or she was saying that perhaps you could put them on the screen as well.
Just maybe adding that within a conceptual framework of a sonic pedagogy, we also need to focus on sounding. And as I think you've mentioned, probably, like not just focusing on listening, because that kind of assumes that that the sound is already there, but also creating space for different soundings and really allowing them to emerge. And I guess, especially within cultural or political archives that are just, we are talking about this epistemologies. So we talk about a field of knowledge production and what knowledge is there, and archives preserve that, but it's a particular way. And so really, maybe that's what we are trying as well with transmission, deconstructing in terms of what isn't there and what hasn't been said or what can't be heard because people, things, places didn't have the chance to express, I guess.
Yeah, just very short add, don't name me down on the word thing. I just want, of course, sound is a practice, or it needs actually an ear to create a sound. Without an ear, sound is just vibrating air, nothing else. So I just wanted to make sure that clear that many of the images are brought from outside in a way, and that sound is not necessarily a positive force or something like this. And that's perhaps not an academic approach, but a general in the public. Yeah.
I just wondered if we can, maybe if I could put a question to Sebastian, and then Elisa, if you could feed me some questions that I can feed on to our panelists. So Sebastian, I was thinking, I mean, we've been talking about that historical predominance of the visual. But Jamaica, I wonder, I won't presume, but I wonder if Jamaica has largely been seen as a sonic island. And in terms of, your project, sorry, the exhibition Jamaica, and it's traveling to Jamaica now, or it's there now, I should say, whether this moment of capturing this heritage in its visual form, and, it's these... it's not just the sonic practice, but it's actually the visual aesthetics as well that's being captured in, or now being more nationally seen, I suppose, nationally seen as heritage, where it was the sound that was traveling. Everybody loves reggae, right? But actually, as we were talking about earlier, the hardware, the kind of visual aspect of the sound system culture. So is Jamaica becoming more sono-visual as opposed to, just audio-visual? Or, yes, I'm just trying to think about this shift from what has largely been seen as an island of sounds.
Well, to me, it's the answer is almost in the question, because if you talk about sound system culture means that it's a multi-layered experience. It's not just music, and it includes other forms of artistic expression. So that's why, to me, and to, I guess, historians of sound system as a culture, makes Jamaica a sonic island, and also a culture that integrates visuals. And what's very important too, and it's an artistic form of expression as well, is the craft, the electronics, the woodwork. All this participates in making it from the get-go. I don't think it has changed. It's always been a mix of all these things put together that makes it actually a culture, not just listening to music. Steve earlier was talking about the clubbing experience in Berlin, in London. It's funny because, to me, what I know more is the experience in Jamaica, where you don't go to a club for a weekend. It's there every day, and there's a night and a dance hall for every age group. On Sunday, the old people in Kingston, they go to a dance called Raytown Sundays. It's people over 70 years old, and they go and they put their nice,
church clothes.
Suit, almost church clothes, but very shiny suits, and they dance, and so it's funny. It's not linked to one category of population, and it's what makes really Jamaica an island where music is part of everyday life. It's not just something you do on the side. It's ingrained in daily life. Like anything you do, you'll go. If you ever go to a burial in Jamaica, you'll be surprised in the street. You see the hearse coming down the street with the coffin on the back, and they're blazing dancehall. Straight up dancehall. And it's like that's how we bury people. We bury people in music because we live in music. And I think that's what makes it very interesting, and a huge difference with our way to, let's say, Western ways to approach music and Jamaica's way to approach music and sound system culture.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, Elisa, if you could just feed through some questions, and I'll try my best to pass them on to the respective. Is that to anyone specific or in general? Okay, a question to all. What did you get out of today's discussions which you hadn't conceived of before? Elisa? That you hadn't thought of before? Okay. So what did you get out of today's discussion that you hadn't thought about before?
Well, can I just say something about the format of today? How refreshing it is after a year of Zoom calls and streaming music sets and so on to see you and Nik walking around a space while being streamed online. It makes me realize how little imagination has gone into a lot of the streaming events of the last year, and how you can use a much more expansive space and still be online at the same time. I think that for me, that was really refreshing, the way that the conversation was taking place. I know it's cold, but taking place in a large space.
In a cold, large space, yes.
And thought that was great.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I actually also have to say I can't wait to play the sound tank sculptures with audience again. We will have certain performances that are also going to be streamed, but there's nothing comparable with the reaction of an audience.
The question of what did you get out of today that you hadn't thought of before?
Yes.
Martin, maybe?
Maybe you can answer that, Jessica, because you've been...
Yeah, I'm amazed that I think in each... Not I'm amazed by it, but in every panel discussion today, there's been something that's just sparked. I can feel the synapses on rewiring. That I could feel so without any inducement. I could feel so high for a day because there've been so many mental exchanges. Thinking again through sort of Steve's how, what was it called? The nocebo, and these other dynamics of unsound, and thinking about that in terms of either the hauntological. So there've been all these. I think I like to think, like most people, I suppose, in a connective manner. But my brain was just rewiring constantly between all the connections that could be made. I think between all of the parts of today. Yeah. Sarah. It's like school, right?
Yes.
What did you learn?
Yeah.
Well, what I learned in our panel was what Professor Müller-Enbergs told us about. I guess, Martin, you could add something perhaps. Was it 19 different modes of sound in just Secret Service surveillance techniques? 19 different modes. And that was only on sound. There might also be modes of different ways of listening that were created in the Cold War and that perhaps inform our hearing still today. And to go into detail on those specifics, I guess we have really to closely listen much more to those former conflicts and to the conflicts of today. You mentioned the perhaps second Cold War going on and the question who controls our sound devices. I mean, former President Trump banning those Chinese apps like TikTok, and that's actually a sound war going on. Who controls our sounds, who controls our devices, who controls who are we listening to? And if we really focus on those conflicts on a very low level, if you want, on a sensory level, you mentioned the color yellow. And I noticed that in German media, the virus, for example, was represented with a very color yellow. And those are sensory stages, early stages, where we have to perhaps create a certain awareness to tackle what conflict actually is going on below the very big official conflicts. And that's what I learned today.
And I think especially as sort of in light of the theme of today, how quickly, and I think Steve's paper showed this, how quickly those conflicts escalate and become so quickly retaliatory. Martin.
Yeah, I guess I would also like to pick up the question of the continuity of the whole conflict, like that after the disappearance of the big USSR opposition, that all these social layers of, let's say, culture production and maybe even control and power are transferred to different media, for example, what Dr. Matzek just said, that computers have become our new windows to the world, and as such, maybe I thought about having them also as the wall, or the surveillance membranes as kind of the point of connection between us all, but wherein also there lies a big power. Where surveillance is possible, and as we heard in clubs, it could be connected to real life situations all the time, and they would have to ask ourselves how these mechanisms form social practices and social cultural life. And how these walls, I mean, they're very existent. Trump built the wall, and we have a wall right around Europe protecting us from all these evil people from outside. So this logic and this rhetorics of the other side and the difference is still very actual. And I think looking either on the one hand, looking at the conflicts in the Cold War with its huge complex dynamics, that we can learn a lot from that. And also we would have to understand that all these practices are still in place in a different way. Like after 9/11, we got the logic of the war on terror, which basically legalized all surveillance and made us all like suspects. And we would really need to look into the history of all this development within the 20th century, because it is really affecting us in every day.
Maybe just adding one thought, that it doesn't affect us in the same way, because it doesn't make us all the same target or suspect, and it creates particular and specific targets and suspects, especially like within the frame of the war on terror, where I probably wouldn't be perceived as a possible terrorist within that framework. But maybe also adding another thought on the phone being this connection to the world. I think it is the world, and the way AI is programmed, and the way it recognizes certain faces and it doesn't recognize other faces, and like the racism that all these institutions and systems kind of are built on is ingrained in these materials, and they are again interrelated. Like there isn't such a thing as us and the world. We are entangled. And I think that's why sound is so amazing, because we can look at that entanglement through sound creeping into holes and not really stopping outside or inside of any kind of spaces or physical spaces.
Sorry, Lisa, do you want to give me the second question? Or the last one, yeah.
Don't eat and drink in the gallery.
I'm not going to remember all of that. Okay, let's break it down. So considering all, see, I just got the first 3 words at this stage. Considering everything that's happened in the last few years, yes. How do you think we can push back against some of the pacification that's being pushed by mood-centric streaming playlist culture? That's very specific. Yeah,
one for the DJs.
Yeah, maybe one. Yeah, one. That's put your hands in the air for one for the DJs. Steve, Sarah.
Spotify.
Oh no, Sarah's about to speak. Did you say Spotify? Sarah.
Some of our guests on our Politics of the Dance Floor podcast actually spoke about that, and I've watched some documentaries about the networks and the people who own those companies, and it's interesting how similar those stories often are. Like often it's like people who come from a certain class, they all have the privilege to study at certain universities. They have money from their parents and start those companies and support each other. And some of them knew, 15 years ago that this is going to be the future. And probably they're thinking they're doing something good, I don't know. But I believe that we really need alternatives. I feel like holding Spotify and those really big streaming services accountable is kind of impossible. Or maybe you could hack them in a way, I don't know. That would be interesting. Maybe there's someone out there who could do that. But yeah, there are some alternatives already happening. Melissa Taylor on our podcast mentioned some of them. For example, Resonate. I can't really explain how it works. I have to look into it myself. But there are things out there, and I believe I guess I mentioned that earlier, that we need like bigger artists to make the first steps as well. It's like telling people to not use Facebook anymore, you know what I mean? And I'm including myself, I'm using Spotify.
But people become so habituated, essentially, that it's like trying to give up a drug.
Right, and
right?
our podcast is available on all these platforms as well. It's really hard to, because also with Instagram and being an artist, like you wouldn't get certain jobs. It feels like you become kind of invisible. So I don't really have an answer to that, but just building the alternative and connecting, and because people are out there and they're working on that right now.
Maybe just a question to the question, because you were and as far as I understood, the question was, how can we go back to this better past? And I really think there wasn't the better past. And I think that's something that we really have to emphasize on when talking about cultural developments, political developments, that it was only better for some, if at all, and that it's a very highly like moral question and heavily loaded question of who can just like want to go back to this before, and who probably would have been killed, or I probably wouldn't have been able to write a PhD because I wouldn't have been allowed to university. So I think also when talking about like streaming services and all these developments, it's about looking at the infrastructures and who profits and how can we build alternatives, rather than just always kind of also immobilizing any kind of activism or change because we say, oh, it has been better in these old days. And I would always be very of people wanting to go back to these old days. Although, I mean, we have to, as Sarah always says, know where we're coming from to know where we're going. So, of course, it's important to know that there was a time where people probably were happy without Instagram as well, or just had a different life.
Or paid artists fully for the...
Yeah, but again, now it's even easier and in a way democratized, like who can participate and who, like the gatekeeping is still there, but people can just have small equipment and create music and put it out there.
But that's at the not quite grassroots, but that's at the democratizing base level. But then who owns that company? So it's the ambivalence.
It's all about the access and all about the infrastructure. And what you were saying before was like who had access to the market, or being whatever broadcasted or printed, or and now it's about owning infrastructure or providing the access to the infrastructure by providing accounts and then being in control.
I believe we need more transparency as well. I have a friend from Chicago, and she's older and made the song back in the days and doesn't profit from it at all. And she's a black woman, and that's also a thing, because I've met other black people from the music industry, and they told me that the music industry is often like an extension of slavery in some ways. And with Black Lives Matter, for example, there are some music labels, they're like, okay, we're gonna open up these contracts again and gonna readjust them in some ways. And I feel like that's also something that needs to happen. I'm also like, why is it so complicated? This can't be a coincidence that it's so hard to understand contracts in general, for example.
Okay, Elisa, any more questions? And where are we in time? Where are we in time?
Purple.
We started or we stopped 1 hour ago? Oh, okay. We started. Okay. We're running late anyway. The time has just slipped. The time is out of joint, I think. So maybe any closing remarks then?
You're looking
sorry,
at
I'm
me,
not just looking. I'm also looking at the screen. Actually, I think I've been looking this way all day, so I think my neck is just physiologically going that way. autonomically. But yeah, I don't know, I don't want to be over optimistic. I'm never overly optimistic anyway. But yeah, of thinking this time post COVID, if we can ever think again of that time, what maybe has been instituted policy-wise in terms of confinement of our bodies to homes, not having these convivial spaces maybe where we can hear and feel sounds. It's not quite the same feeling it through your laptop as you dance around the bedroom to a DJ set. Well, maybe not for me. But yeah, maybe thinking about how maybe the state makes use of the times such as this when extraordinary methods are put in place or extraordinary policies are put in place, and sometimes how loath they are to relinquish them when the time becomes, the time becomes better. Maybe this is me ending on a negative note, but I'm just thinking about, we've been so used now for the past year and a half, coming 2 years, of self-confining and not moving our bodies in a certain way, not feeling in certain ways maybe, in a way that's becoming quite habituated. And yet with the amplification of certain, or maybe with Trump gone, that's a different case, but with the amplification of so many other concerns, we see the rise of domestic violence, the rise of questions around misogyny, Black Lives Matters. I'm just thinking, where is sound, the state, all of these things? Where maybe that's too big, I don't know, but where is the state and sound? How can sound be used as a way to mitigate against the encroachment, the further encroachment, without thinking about or thinking too positively about the time before? It's a ramble. It's not really a question, but I feel that in this time that something has happened, this shift, and that maybe we're becoming too habituated and resigned maybe to it.
I have the hope that on the 15th of May we can drive the mobile sound systems outside and have a collective experience that is something that that I hope that can happen. But I agree with you that actually the regulations and everything are we are so used to that, and they were already before very heavy on sound systems and the use of sound systems and sound like noise production on the street or in also art context. I was always confronted with that in terms of making music and performances, and other sound systems asked me, how is it in Berlin? Like, can we play to a certain decibel level, or is it like in London where it's regulated? And so all these regulations, they are so established that this is also a question of control, right? Like, is there something like autonomy for sound making to re-establish for everyone?
I think because we were talking maybe earlier about the gentrification of areas, and as they become more and more gentrified, then it's the kind of commercial aspect of it is about maintaining the facade of the area rather than it actually being a lived area. The reduction in sound because the neighbors want to go to bed at 10 o'clock or whatever. And so sound, at least in its attractional force, is perhaps finding less spaces to propagate in. I mean, maybe that always drives it to find new spaces, But I think with the increasing gentrification, I mean, you see it here in Berlin. You know, I think when I first arrived, or maybe when I first started coming to Berlin in 2010, 2011, there were these huge spaces, you know, that were there for artists and music makers, and suddenly they've been brought up, and you know, they don't exist anymore. Anyway, so yeah.
Erkan Afan on our Politics of the Dance Floor podcast said something really cool when we spoke about gentrification, and he said that we basically need more block parties, that they may be a form of resistance that you could use to activate people in a fun way to be more political and care about music culture and those spaces in the city.
Yeah, maybe if I can try to be a little bit more positive with this whole crisis situation. No, I'm the negative person normally. But to try to get something out of this whole mess of a year we had behind us. And also thinking about the Berlin club scene, that before the crisis it has been awful and very hard for clubs to maintain. Like lots of clubs closed. Some of the scene, my taste, got a little bit more like capitalized and opened up to large and very monotonous events. So for me the question is how to gain consciousness, gain resistance, or the opportunity for people to congregate in demonstrations on the streets, get self-organized, maybe without or within the lockdown. We've seen that it is possible that people can exercise certain practices of solidarity with helping people on the streets, helping elderly people in general, acknowledging the fact that we are part of a huge society and we all have the responsibility to take care of each other. Maybe with this whole crisis we learned how important human connections are, and how important also clubs and sound for bringing us together is. And with this consciousness, I hope that we could learn to get back together and fight against all these, let's call it very abstract, all these walls around us.
That's more of a positive note to end on, I think. So I'd like really sincerely and heartfeltly to thank all of you, Lewis, who's not here, Sebastian, Nick, Steve, Sarah, Kerstin, Bodo, Martin, Helmut, who is also not here. Yes, I've had an amazing day of really intense, really mind-rearranging exchanges. It also falls to me to, and maybe you can help me with this, to thank our supporters.
Yeah, maybe we mention the upcoming performances as well. They're going to take place here. That is tomorrow, a War of Decibels at 8 o'clock.
What is it called, Nick?
A War of Decibels. What it is?
It's called a War of Decibels, yes.
Then on the 10th is that the 10th
And how will
April?
people see that?
Via the same channel, United
At
We
what
Stream
time?
at 8.
Oh, good. Okay,
Yeah,
8.
I said that already.
Oh, sorry.
Then Sarah Farina and DJ Uta and Sasha Pereira,
Pereira elsewhere.
Sorry, are playing on the 10th of April. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like we worked so many night shifts. I have to say, April seems to be a long way.
Like basically digital dance floor.
And it's on the 10th of April. Do you have the date right?
Can check my phone.
Yeah, but it's on the website. It's on the United We Stream website. From a whisper to a riot.
Yeah, that's great. Mm-hmm.
And then on the 24th of April is DJ Scotch Rolex and Lord Spikeheart and guests in the performance called Crossing Borders. And now you can thank everybody.
Okay, well, you can help me with that.
I will.
Because I think at this point my brain is maybe a little fried. So we obviously have to thank Nik for allowing us to film in this very different way. This has been a very engaging experience of obviously not doing it in the traditional Zoom way, to be in an active space. So we have to thank for that as well, United We Stream and Frank's team.
We thank the camera team and Frank Zaban for the amazing work of making this complex setup working, and that we have so many perspectives, and for the incredible engagement and investment in terms of time and energy and long hours, and as well as Andre Ketzel, who did the technical direction, and his team, and Elisa Braun for the media operation, and Elke Moltrecht for the project management, and Anton for the sound. And of course, you two being the chair, and Jessica, you conceiving this amazing program, and being so
Cold.
Yeah, I have to say, this last hour is brutal on us.
Sorry, this is the endurance.
Yes, and definitely we can't. We have to thank Music Board for the funding.
Music Board Berlin.
And thank you all.
And KINDL.
And KINDL, of course, is our host. But yeah, that's where we are.
Thank you so much, everyone. I would also add Music Matter. No, what are they called?
Oh yeah, thank you, Music Matter, for all the
Innes, yes.
public relation.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Now, we can say thank you. And thank you, Sebastian, Steve, Sarah, Kerstin, Bodo again, Martin, Helmut, Lewis, Nik Nowak. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Really brilliant. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.